Tonight on Business Live, Ghana's economy slows down in growth in the first quarter of this year compared to same period last year. We have the latest from the government statistician.
GDP for the first quarter of 2022 grew by 3.3%, and this is less than half what we saw in the last quarter of 2021.
Also, Finance Minister reiterates government's commitment to account for all funds expended to fight the COVID-19 pandemic.
Supports to household, health responses, health infrastructure, security operations, economic relief, COVID-19 vaccines, other COVID-related expenditure, all summing up to the 12.03 billion.
Plus, on the Joy Business Van, we will meet Sewa Jefi Doku, the resilient entrepreneur behind one of Ghana's fastest growing restaurants, Chop Shop.
It was basically a side business. I mean, what they usually call a side hustle. You know, I took it a day at a time, of obviously running on really limited resources.
We have all of these and more coming up in the next 30 minutes. I'm Beverly Broom. Please stay. Hello and welcome. Let's settle down for the details now. Ghana's economy slowed down in growth in the first quarter of this year compared to the same period last year. The economy recorded 3.3% growth rate, aided by some marginal expansions in the services and agriculture sector. According to government statistician Professor Samuel Kobna Enim, the agriculture sector led the growth rate, expanding by 5.6%, followed by services with a growth rate of 3.7%.
The real GDP for the first quarter of 2022 grew by 3.3%, and this is less than half what we saw in the last quarter of 2021. In the last quarter of 2021, we did record a 7.0 oil GDP growth rate, and now we are recording a 3.3 oil GDP growth rate for the first quarter of 2022. From a non-oil perspective, we recorded 3.7% for the first quarter of 2022 relative to the 7.6% that we recorded for the last quarter of 2021. If you look at this from the perspective of the first quarter of 2021, these are the lowest growth rates that we've recorded, discounting the contractions that we recorded during the COVID-19 era. So since the economy rebounds in 2022 quarter 4, these are the lowest growth rates that we've recorded over this time period. We look at the average for the period quarter 1 2014 to quarter 1 2022 and compare that with the growth rate for quarter 1 2022. We look at this from the subsectors perspectives and also from an oil GDP and a non-oil GDP perspective. From a sector perspective, the agricultural sector for the first quarter of 2022 saw the highest growth rate of 5.6%, and the industry sector saw the least growth rate of 1.3%. The services sector saw a growth rate of 3.7%. With the exception of the agricultural sector that recorded a growth rate higher than the rolling average from the first quarter of 2014 to the first quarter of 2022, the industry and the services sectors recorded lower growth rate, i.e. the industry sector had 1.3 as its growth rate for the first quarter of 2022 relative to the 4.5 average for the period 2014 quarter 1 to 2022 quarter 1. The services sector also saw a slowdown in its growth rate as the first quarter of 2022 grew by 3.7% relative to the rolling average 4.5 for the period Q1 2014 to Q1 2022.
Helping us to understand this is Dr. Williams Pipra. He'll be joining us via Zoom to explain more. He's the Associate Professor of Finance at the University of USA. Finance at Andrews University, USA. Hello, Doc, if you can hear me. Ghana's economy expanded by 3.3% in Q1 compared to 3.7% in the same period last year. What does this mean to us? And I guess the economy is expanding despite the challenges affecting the fiscals.
Hello, Barrow, can you hear me?
Yes, please, I can.
Okay, good evening, and thank you very much for calling me. As it has been said by the government statistician, he was just looking at the final value or the monetary value of goods and services that were produced within the country for the first quarter. The indication is that we have seen a drop if you compare this year's value to last year's value, almost half of it. What it means is that output by half. So, with the exception of the agricultural sector, which saw an increase, both services and manufacturing sector had a major reduction in terms of production. And as the statistician mentioned, this is as a result of the impact of COVID-19 and the Russian war, Russia and Ukrainian war, which is ongoing. So this is the impact. The impact is that as a country, we are not able to produce much goods and services as we did last year. The ripple effect is that there are some areas that there will be some in terms of providing items for the country, in terms of manufacturing side, that there will be some shortages. And as you are aware, manufacturing side is not doing well or did not do well because of the cost of raw material importation. So as he mentioned, it's a major impact. We have seen agricultural sector increasing to 5.5, all because Ghana, as we admit, about 60% of the employment, people in the employment age are involved in agriculture. And this is a good sign also. If we are able to get the needed raw materials and then chemicals or inputs, and then also to get the youth to also focus in agriculture, our economy will be able to go back to the time where agri was leading. And this, in the future, we intend to reduce inflation in the country.
Doc, let's talk about government's projections of the GDP. So government is projecting about 5.8% GDP growth rate this year. This presupposes that the economy will grow strongly based on the first quarter numbers. If we are not hit by any shocks, do you share the same thoughts?
Just looking at what is up currently in the first quarter and then some activities in the second quarter, I am not sure we'll be able to get to the GDP figures that we have envisaged to have in 2022. All because we see a lot of challenges in the production sector. We are anticipating, as was being discussed yesterday, fuel shortage is something which is being anticipated, which will have a major impact in the production sector, and it's also going to have a major impact even in the transportation sector. So as this is a major thing that we need in the country, that there are fuel or petrol or diesel in the country to make sure that we focus on production. If we're able to get these things in the country, then we may as a country get closer to the set target. But with what is happening and the impact of COVID-19, and there's also the surge coming up again, all these factors is going to affect the projections. And also the inflation rate, the high inflation rate in the country it's also going to have a reverse impact on the GDP, because mostly when a country is experiencing high inflation, to slow the inflation down, government will have to intentionally reduce its expenditure, which will also affect production in the country. So it is something that is going to happen, that we may not be able to reach the set targets.
But Doc, what should government do to reach the set target you're talking about? Hello, Dr. Pepa, if you can hear me. I want to know what you think policymakers should do to ensure our economic growth rate is tied to job creation.
I mean, we know government is coming up with the Youth Start program. Already we have the agricultural program, which is youth in agriculture program. So if government will make sure that the funds, the 10 billion fund that is being mentioned in the budget, will go to the youth and purposely to agriculture, it will help us to be able to achieve the set target and then put the youth at work. At the moment, the service industry is full. Government admit that its own employment into the ministries is limited. So what is required is that to make the youth entrepreneurs. So I'm expecting that government will channel more resources into the training and then giving the startup capital for the youth to move into these areas to make sure that our production increase within the country. Most of the youth nowadays are focused on online activities. Government may also look at a way to be able to enhance that activity that will get the youth working day by day. So it is something that it has to be very strategic. We are seeing that agriculture is the way to go. We all admit that. Can government focus more on that area? And that to help us to be able to even reduce the inflation in the country, because if we have food in the country, the cost of food will come down, and then it will have a ripple effect also on inflation. So this is, to me, my advice is that the youth agricultural program should be intensified. A lot of funding must be given to that sector, and then to be able to make sure that we're able to get the youth working.
Right, Dr. Pepa, thank you so much for your time. We'll take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we have more. That's how we end Business Live tonight. Thank you so much for watching. You can visit myjoyonline.com/business for more of our stories. I am Beverly Broom. Have a good evening.